The descent from the cliff edge was a torture of crumbling shale and slick mud. Kaelen moved first, testing every foothold, his broken rib grinding against his leathers with every breath. The pain was a sharp, hot needle, but he used it. Pain meant he was alive. Pain kept him awake. Elara followed, her small hands gripping the roots and rocks with a determination that belied her size. They were descending into a graveyard. The sunken coast was a chaotic jumble of history washed up by the tides. Ancient stone archways poked out of the sand like skeletal fingers. The hulls of smashed galleons lay on their sides, their ribs exposed to the gray sky. The roar of the ocean was deafening here, a constant thundering bass that vibrated in the soles of their boots. The mist was thick, tasting of salt and rot. They hit the beach, boots sinking into wet sand that was black with volcanic ash. The temperature here was warmer than the mountains, but it was a clammy, suffocating warmth. Kaelen scanned the shoreline. There was no movement, only the relentless crash of the waves against the ruins. "Stay close," he rasped, his voice lost in the wind. He drew his sword, the steel stained dark from the bear's blood. He didn't bother cleaning it. Rust would take it soon enough in this air. They needed a boat. The architect's tower was miles out, a black needle piercing the horizon. But looking at the surf, Kaelen knew a simple raft would be smashed to kindling in seconds. They needed a skiff, a whaler, something with a keel. They walked through a labyrinth of wreckage. It was like walking through the ribcage of a giant beast. Massive curved timbers of oak and ironwood created tunnels of shadow. Kaelen saw names painted on the rotting wood. The Gilded Lady, Stormbreaker, King's Mercy, ships from every kingdom, brought here by currents or curses. He stopped at a relatively intact longboat, but when he kicked the hull, his boot went straight through the rotten wood. Termites? No. The wood was spongy, dissolved by something acidic. "The water is wrong here too," Elara said, pinching her nose. "It smells like old magic." Kaelen knelt by a tide pool. The water wasn't clear. It was a murky, iridescent slick, swirling with oil and algae. He saw a crab scuttle across the bottom. It had two heads. Kaelen stood up abruptly. "Don't touch the water," he warned. "Not unless you have to." He looked back at the cliff. High above on the ridge they had just left, a faint purple glow was beginning to bleed over the edge. The corruption was fast. It had crossed the forest in a night. They had hours, maybe less, before the silence rolled down that hill and turned this beach into a statue garden. "We need to find the scavengers," Kaelen said. "If people live here, they have boats that float." They moved inland slightly toward a cluster of structures built from salvaged ship parts. It was a shanty town, a patchwork of prows and sterns nailed together. Smoke drifted from a crooked chimney. Kaelen sheathed his sword but kept his hand on the hilt. "Let me do the talking," he told Elara. "And if I tell you to run, you run toward the water. Can you swim?" Elara nodded. "Good. If we have to swim, the water won't kill us as fast as the silence." It was a grim calculation, but Kaelen was out of comforting lies. He approached the settlement. A perimeter fence made of sharpened driftwood stakes blocked the path. Skulls, human and large fish, were mounted on the posts. A bell rang out, a dull, cracked sound.
Clang! Clang!
Figures emerged from the shacks. They were wrapped in layers of oiled leather and fish skin, their faces hidden behind masks made of driftwood or shell. The Saltborn. Kaelen held his hands up, palms open. "Travelers," he shouted, "seeking passage." The figures didn't speak. They fanned out surrounding Kaelen and Elara. They moved with a swaying gait like they were still on a rolling deck. One of them, taller than the rest, stepped forward. He wore a coat made of patched heavy canvas and a mask that looked like the skull of a seal. He held a harpoon tipped with jagged obsidian. "Passage to where?" the leader asked. His voice was wet, gurgling as if his throat was full of water. Kaelen didn't flinch. "The tower," he said, nodding toward the ocean. The gathered Saltborn hissed, stepping back. The leader laughed, a wheezing sound. "The drowned spire? No one goes there. The water eats the wood. The Leviathan eats the flesh." Kaelen reached into his belt pouch. He had no gold. Gold was useless here. He pulled out the only thing of value he had left, a dagger made of star steel, a relic from the capital. It didn't rust. "I can pay," Kaelen said, flipping the dagger so it caught the dull light. "Steel that never sleeps." The leader stepped closer, snatching the dagger with a gloved hand. He inspected it, testing the edge against his thumb. "Good steel," he muttered, "but not enough for a boat. Boats are life here." Kaelen stepped forward, his size imposing despite his injury. "I don't need to buy a boat. I need to rent one. 1 hour. We go out, we come back." The leader tilted his head. "You don't come back from the spire. But—" He looked at Elara. "The girl, she smells of the storm." The leader pointed the harpoon at Elara. "Is she the offering?" Kaelin's hand moved to his sword hilt instantly. "She is the passenger. Touch her, and I'll burn this pile of driftwood to the ground." The standoff was broken by a sound from the cliff. A deep, resonant thump, the same sound from Oakhaven. The Saltborn froze. They looked up. The purple fog was cascading down the cliff face like an avalanche, silent and terrifying. Where it touched the scrub brush, the plants turned to gray stone instantly. "The silence!" one of the scavengers screamed. Panic erupted. The circle broke as the Saltborn scrambled toward the water, launching their small canoes and rafts. They knew what this was. They had seen it on the horizon. The leader looked at the fog, then at the dagger, then at Kaelen. "Take the skiff by the pier," he shouted, backing away. "Take it and rot in hell." He ran for his own boat. "Run!" Kaelen grabbed Elara's arm. They sprinted toward the rickety wooden pier jutting out into the surf. A small, flat-bottomed skiff was tied there, bobbing violently in the chop. The fog was fast, faster than a horse. It was devouring the beach. The sand turned to a sheet of gray concrete behind them. The sound of the ocean was being swallowed. As the fog moved over the crashing waves on the shore, the waves froze in mid-curl, turning into sculptures of glass and ice. It was a terrifying sight, a tsunami of stillness chasing them. Kaelin's ribs screamed as he vaulted onto the pier. They jumped into the skiff. Kaelen slashed the mooring rope with his sword. "Get down!" he yelled, grabbing the oars. He rowed with a manic strength, ignoring the tearing sensation in his chest. The boat surged away from the pier. Seconds later, the fog hit the pier. The wood groaned and turned to gray slate. The water around the pilings froze solid. The silence stopped at the edge of the deep water, hovering there like a predator waiting for them to return. They were safe for the moment, bobbing on the gray swells, but the land was gone. Oakhaven, the forest, the beach, all of it was a silent tomb now. Kaelen rowed until his arms burned, putting a mile of water between them and the shore. He collapsed over the oars, gasping. Elara sat in the prow, staring at the black tower ahead. It loomed larger now, a monolith of obsidian rising hundreds of feet out of the sea. There were no windows, only a single opening near the water level, a dark maw. "We made it," Kaelen wheezed. "Halfway." The ocean here was deep and unsettled. Huge swells lifted the small boat and dropped it into troughs that hid the horizon. "Kaelen," Elara whispered, "the water, it's singing." Kaelen looked up. "Singing? Not with words," she said, leaning over the gunwale. "It sounds like hunger." Kaelen grabbed her collar and pulled her back to the center of the boat. "Don't look into it. The deep plays tricks." He scanned the water. He saw shapes moving beneath the surface, massive dark shapes, shadows that were darker than the water. The Saltborn leader had mentioned a leviathan. Kaelen had dismissed it as sailor superstition. Now, looking at the sheer size of the shadows gliding under their keel, he wasn't so sure. He checked his sword. It seemed pitifully small against an ocean. They rowed closer to the tower. The air grew colder. Kaelen noticed something disturbing. The violet fog on the shore wasn't stopping. It was slowly creeping out over the water. It was freezing the surface of the ocean, turning the waves into a jagged plain of ice-like stone. It was slower than on land, but it was relentless. "It's following us," Kaelen said, rowing harder. "The crystal in Oakhaven, it didn't just break, it infected the world." They were in a race. If the ocean froze before they reached the tower, they would be trapped in the ice, entombed forever. A tremor shook the boat, not a wave, a physical impact from below. Kaelen lost his grip on an oar. He scrambled to grab it before it floated away. "It knows we're here," Elara said, her voice trembling. "The Guardian." Kaelen got the oar back and rowed with desperate rhythm. Stroke, breath, stroke, breath. The tower was close now, maybe 200 yards. He could see the opening, a water gate, barnacle-encrusted but open. "Hold on, Elara, we're gonna crash land if we have to." The water around them began to thicken. It wasn't freezing yet, but it was becoming sluggish, like syrup. The corruption was affecting the viscosity. Kaelin's strokes grew harder. The oars bent under the strain. "Come on," he roared at the sea. "Is that all you have?" As if in answer, a massive tentacle, thick as a tree trunk and covered in hooked suckers, erupted from the water 20 yards to their left. It slapped the surface, sending a wave that nearly capsized them. It wasn't flesh, it was semi-translucent, made of deep-sea jelly and shadow. "Elara!" Kaelen shouted. "Can you do it again? The magic? Push it back!" Elara shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know how. It just happened." Kaelen didn't have time to coach her. He abandoned the oars and grabbed the rudder, steering them into the wake of the monster, trying to use the turbulence to push them toward the tower. Another tentacle rose on the right. They were being corralled. The creature was playing with them. The violet ice behind them was closing in, a grinding wall of silence only half a mile away now. The tower loomed above them, blotting out the sky. The entrance was a dark tunnel. "We're going in!" Kaelen yelled. But the Leviathan had other plans. The water directly in front of the gate began to churn. A whirlpool formed, spinning counterclockwise. A massive beak, like a squid's but made of black iron, slowly rose from the center of the vortex. It blocked the path. They were trapped. Behind them, the freezing ocean. In front of them, the monster. Kaelen looked at the freezing wall behind them. It was 100 yards away. He looked at the monster. He made a choice. "We aren't stopping," he said, standing up in the rocking boat. He grabbed the flask of oil he had saved, the last of it. "Steer," he told Elara. He poured the oil onto the blade of his sword and struck it against the metal railing of the boat. Whoosh! The blade ignited. It was a pathetic flame against the ocean, but it was bright. "Hey!" he screamed at the monster. "Over here, you ugly bastard!" The beast took the bait. The tentacles converged on the boat. Kaelen waited. He waited until the smell of the creature, rotting fish and ozone, filled his nose. Then he threw the sword, not at the beast. He threw it into the water, right into the center of the whirlpool. The flaming sword spun through the air and plunged into the vortex. Kaelen grabbed the oars again. "Hard left!" he screamed. Elara jammed the rudder. The boat lurched, scraping against the stone foundation of the tower, narrowly missing the beak as it snapped shut on the empty water where they would have been. They drifted past the monster into the shadow of the archway, but they weren't safe. The violet silence had caught up. As the boat glided into the tunnel, the water behind them froze. The Leviathan roared, a sound that shattered the air, and then was cut off. Kaelen looked back. The monster was frozen, caught in the act of turning. The tentacles were suspended in the air, turning to jagged violet glass. The whirlpool had solidified into a spiral of sharp ice. The silence had eaten the guardian. The momentum of the boat carried them deeper into the tunnel, but the freezing didn't stop at the entrance. It was chasing them down the canal. Crackle, snap. The sound of water turning to stone echoed off the walls. "Row!" Kaelen shouted, but the water under them was getting thick. The oars slapped against the surface like it was mud. Then, jelly. Then nothing. The boat jerked to a violent halt. Kaelen was thrown forward. The water around them had hardened. They were frozen in place, 50 feet inside the tower. Kaelen scrambled up. He tested the surface of the water with his boot. It held his weight. It was slick, like polished marble, and cold. "Out," he ordered. "We walk." They climbed out of the boat onto the frozen canal. It was a surreal sensation, walking on the surface of the water in a dark tunnel. Beneath their feet, visible through the semi-transparent violet stone, were fish, frozen in mid-swim. They ran deeper into the dark, away from the entrance, guided only by the faint bioluminescent moss on the ceiling. The tunnel opened into a massive underground harbor inside the tower. It was a cavernous space, filled with ancient, rotting ships that had been pulled in here centuries ago. And in the center of the cavern was a dry dock. On the dock stood a figure, not a monster, a construct, a tall mechanical golem made of brass and glass, standing motionless. Behind it, a spiral staircase wound up into the darkness of the tower above. "The architect?" Kaelen whispered. "No," Elara said. "The butler." They walked across the frozen harbor toward the dock. The silence here was absolute. The thump of the corruption was gone, replaced by a heavy, dead stillness. Kaelen climbed the ladder to the dock, helping Elara up. They approached the golem. It was ancient, covered in verdigris. Its eyes were dark lenses. Kaelen tapped the metal chest plate. "Hello? Nothing. It's dead," he said. "Everything here is dead." Elara touched the golem's hand. "It's not dead," she said. "It's waiting." Suddenly the golem whirred, a sound of grinding gears. The eyes flared with a yellow light. It didn't attack, it spoke. The voice was mechanical, scratchy, like a needle on a record. "Guests," it said, "unexpected. The master is indisposed." Kaelen stepped forward. "We need to see him. The world is ending." The golem's head swiveled to Kaelen. "The world ended a long time ago, sir. This is just the echo." The golem pointed to the stairs. "He is at the apex, but be warned, he has not slept in 1,000 years." They began the climb. The stairs were endless, winding up through the hollow core of the tower. They passed rooms filled with strange machinery, globes of spinning light, tanks of bubbling fluid, libraries of books that hummed. This was a place of high science and deep magic. Kaelin's legs burned, his injury throbbing, but he didn't stop. Elara seemed energized, the magic of the tower resonating with her own. "I can feel him," she said. "He's sad, so sad." They reached the top. A massive set of double doors made of white weirwood stood before them. Kaelen pushed them open. The room beyond was an observatory. The walls were glass, offering a 360-degree view of the ocean. But the view was a nightmare. The ocean was violet. As far as the eye could see, the water had turned to stone. The sky was a swirling vortex of purple clouds. And in the center of the room, staring out at the destruction, stood a man. He wore simple robes. He looked human, but his skin was cracked like porcelain. The architect turned. His face was a map of sorrow. "You brought the silence with you," he said softly. Kaelen walked into the room, his boots echoing. "We ran from it. We thought you could stop it." The architect laughed, a dry, brittle sound. "Stop it? I made it. I made it to save her." He pointed to a glass tank in the corner of the room. Kaelen looked. Floating in the tank, preserved in amber fluid, was a woman. She was beautiful, and she was dead. "I wanted to freeze time so she wouldn't leave," the architect said. "But time doesn't like to be frozen. It fights back." "Fix it," Kaelen demanded, drawing his sword. "Unfreeze it." The architect shook his head. "I can't. The machine is broken, the crystal shattered." He looked at Elara, his eyes widened. "But you have the frequency." He stepped toward the girl. "You are the key I couldn't forge." Suddenly, the tower shook. A massive crack appeared in the glass wall. The violet ice outside was rising, climbing the tower like a living vine. It smashed through the window. Shards of glass and violet ice sprayed into the room. The silence had found them. It wasn't just freezing the world. It was coming for the only two people left awake.